You're live, Paul.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everybody. Happy Saturdays. Well, I say good morning. I suppose we could be anywhere in the world right now. Good evening, good afternoon. Are we all okay? Thank you for joining us for this Data Toboggan on a Saturday. I guess I've got the fun job of kicking us off, haven't we, with this toboggan of Synapse. Synapse. We could debate that as well, couldn't we, as we go through the day. So, as you hopefully are aware, I'm here to give you an introduction to Azure Synapse Analytics, and also as hopefully you've looked at the agenda. My name is Paul Andrew. I'm now a group manager and analytics architect with this very orange Avanade company based in the UK. If you would like a copy of my slides, feel free to go and get them from my GitHub repository. There is already a PDF of them up there, so if you like some of the visuals, feel free to go and grab that. So the agenda, you've obviously got a very packed agenda over the next 12 hours looking at Azure Synapse Analytics and lots of different things that are going to go into it. And I'm sure you'll see lots of great demos from lots of great speakers. So I guess to start off and to give you that introduction, this is my intended agenda, but what I really want to do is focus on that top part. I really want to focus on what is it? What is Azure Synapse Analytics? And then I'll probably just tack on a few bits and pieces and things that are good to know about this resource that will hopefully then set up a lot of the other talks that you're going to see throughout today. So let's dive in. Let's answer that first question because it is the most important one that we need to establish as our baseline today. So what is Azure Synapse Analytics? Now, I absolutely agonized over this question for a very, very long time. It was, quite frankly, a hard one to answer. And the reason for that is because Azure Synapse Analytics can do so much. It is so many things. I think the other problem, which, without being too negative, we could fairly easily say is that given the journey that we've had with Synapse since it was first announced, which I'll talk about in a moment, is there's been a lot of hype, a lot of confusion, and for the technical people on the receiving end of it, of course, that's made it difficult to really answer this question of what is Azure Synapse Analytics. So for me, the longest time here, the answer was, well, no, I just don't know. It's too hard to kind of put into words. And I thought, well, is it? So as I say, I did agonize over this question. But of course, we arrived at an answer. And the first answer that I arrived at and the best answer that I could really give was it's lots of things. It absolutely is lots of things. I thought, well, okay, although that answer's correct, obviously it's not good enough for this audience. We obviously want to understand more about it. We're hopefully going to be using this and we need to know what it can do and what's available there. So I agonized some more and, went for a walk around the house and things to try and unravel what I was going to have as my answer. So the next answer that I arrived at, answer version 2, was Azure Synapse Analytics is a complete suite of cloud-native data processing services. So I put that as my answer, and I thought about this for a while. And I then sort of agonized some more. And I thought, okay, well, is this true? Is it a complete suite of cloud-native data processing? Data processing, of course, in the very broad sense. And I thought, yeah, I think that's a good answer. And then I thought, okay, well, what about if I just remove the cloud native part from that? What if I just say a complete suite of data processing services? Now, if you said to me 10 years ago, I'm talking about a complete suite of data processing services, and somebody says, well, what are you describing here? What is the thing that we're talking about when we say a complete suite of data processing services? And I thought for a while, and I thought, well, if 10 years ago you were saying to me that's the thing I'm talking about, I would probably say, okay, then What we're actually talking about there is the SQL Server product. The SQL Server product being a complete suite of data processing services, because of course, if people out there that are old like me will know that within SQL Server, we have our database engine, we have our integration services packages to do that transformations, we have our cube databases, we have our reporting services once upon a time, just to obviously name the sort of the four common ones amongst a whole bunch of other stuff. So that complete suite of data processing services, we could be talking about SQL Server. So I then thought some more, and I then thought, okay, well, if we're putting those things side by side, and this is kind of just my view, hopefully, to start off with answering this question, I thought, well, could we say that Synapse is to data processing in Azure what SQL Server is to data processing on premises? And I thought, yeah, okay, that's a reasonable starting point. I thought, yeah, we could do that, or we could say that. Again, data processing is very broad here, I appreciate. And I thought, well, should we add one more sort of caveat to that statement? So I thought, yeah, let's add the caveat of especially, considering what Microsoft have brought to the SQL 2019 product within the big data clusters offering. I thought, yeah, okay, I'm comfortable with that. Now, this hopefully might spark some debate and some questioning in the chat on Slack, which I absolutely welcome. But this for me was a starting point of trying to answer this question of what is Azure Synapse Analytics. I'm not, of course, talking about what it can do. It's very much just a starting point here. So with that, what is it? I've kind of given a starting point here and a baseline, if you like, to answer that question. But I want to try and answer that question in a few different ways, because the service can do lots of things. The next way I would like to try and answer it for you is with a timeline, just to give a bit of background, a bit of context, just so we really understand what's kind of led up to the point where we are now. Now, I appreciate my timeline actually ends in December, deliberately, because that's when the service was announced as being generally available. But if we dial back the clock over a year to November of 2019, when Synapse was first announced, and I was sat over in Seattle at the PaaS Summit, and the keynote there, I think it was Rohan that was doing it, he said that, okay, we've got this new service available, Synapse, and he gave us some information and some demos about it. I thought, oh, great. So at the time I tweeted, I thought, okay, this new Synapse service, and I put, well, my summary based on what Rohan has just shown me is that we've got Data Factory in here, we've got SQLDW, we've got a SQLDB, we've got some Polybase capabilities, some Spark capabilities, and some Power BI capabilities. And in November of 2019, when I first saw this, I think as a lot of people did, because it was very much a big secret until then, that was my view of it. So I thought, okay, fine. So then what happened was that what it seemed to me was that Microsoft went onto their documentation site and they did a find and replace on everything that said Azure SQL Data Warehouse, and they replaced it with Synapse. And that was okay, fine, we can rename a product, but it obviously left a lot of wanting of that other stuff that we'd seen in that announcement and that demonstration. And then things went quiet. So, throughout the rest of November and December and January, although there was lots of hype around Synapse, that's where the confusion came, because then even in the Azure portal, we just saw that Synapse was a renamed SQL Data Warehouse. So, this was, I think, fairly unhelpful for a lot of people, and this is where a lot of the confusion came. So what happened next, and it took until actually March of 2020 for me, which was when through sort of MVP channels, I finally got access in private preview to the workspace. So this user interface that looked a lot like the user interface we had from Data Factory. So once we had access to this workspace, we then started to get, or I started to get, an appreciation of what was actually in this Synapse suite of services as I've kind of started to describe it. And as you'll see here, I've put on that, of course, July was then the time that public preview access was open to the workspace. So, you know, a huge amount of time passed from November, then this rename happened, and then it took until July the following year before the public could actually really appreciate what was in Synapse, because it was the workspace that gave us that visibility. So, you know, that wasn't great. There was certainly a lot of confusion, I think, because of that. Then the next thing I've put on my timeline is the Microsoft Build conference. So, you know, another sort of key thing in the calendar for developers, certainly. And sometimes we get some data announcements there, sometimes not. In the case of Build May 2020, I think there was almost nothing about data in there at all. Data platform, it just wasn't featured in any sort of announcements. But, you know, fine, that was okay. What perhaps we then sort of realized was that in the following month, when the Spark and AI Summit was running, that's perhaps the catalyst, and that's, I guess, what Microsoft were waiting for when it came to Synapse, because they then introduced some of their features and their capabilities that they then added to their own Spark implementation that they then baked into their Synapse workspace, this Apache Spark open source compute that they'd added. And we also got a .NET namespace, which you could then look at, and, you know, with a little bit of reverse engineering, you could start to interpret what else was available. So, you know, this was good, this was helpful. But on this timeline, you know, this is still a lot of time that's passed from that announcement. Then to complete my timeline, in November of 2020, so a full year on from the announcement, we then had source control available. And for me, this is quite important, because it's one thing to be able to look at that workspace and look at what's in this product. It's another thing to, of course, then look at the code that's been produced that goes into your repository. And that obviously really helps you understand, what is this service made of? What do I ultimately need to then deploy into my next environment or whatever? And what you'll probably find if you've done this is that you have a set of JSON files for everything that goes into Synapse. It's just put into the repository as JSON. Even amusingly, a SQL script has a JSON file extension. But anyway, so I'm sort of coming back, and I will come back to this. What is Synapse? And this is just a timeline view of it, and hopefully to try and maybe overcome some of that hype, some of that confusion. But this was my interpretation of it over the sort of the past year or so. And probably another sort of oops amusement there that you've probably spotted. I've put them in the bottom left, that I was obviously frantically searching for Synapse when I was sat over in Seattle in November, and I ultimately came across the Egyptian company, Synapse-Analytics.io, whose website promptly crashed with all the traffic that was going to it. But anyway, amusing. So what is Synapse? That's a timeline answer to the question. Now, the next way I'm going to try and answer it is according to Microsoft. You know, they should know, right? So what I do is, and I do this in a lot of my talks, I go to the Microsoft website and I say, okay, what is Synapse? You know, tell me about the product. And of course, you know, these websites, they're normally done by, say, the marketing department, and you know, there's sometimes some amusement around the marketing department's interpretation of the technology, which as technical people, you know, we think, well, that's not right. But yeah, it's okay, we'll go through this. And what we quickly see here is limitless. Synapse is limitless. Excellent, good. You know, that really tells me a lot. And scale, limitless and scale, you know, the two key things that we all need in any resource these days. So without picking too much on the narrative, the The other amusing thing here is that if you play this video, which very nice production, very nice graphics and animations in this video, if you click play and you go through it, what you'll find out about Synapse, as Microsoft tell us themselves, that when you get 19 seconds into this video, they refer to everything that we've been building before Synapse as stitching together a multitude of services. I think, yeah, okay, fine, that's true. There's a lot of core services that will go into a data platform solution when we're delivering it, perhaps. What they'll also then go on to tell us as well is that when we were stitching together those multitude of services, what that has resulted in is a lot of high maintenance, brittle architectures. And I think, oh, really? Is that what we've really been doing? So I think, okay, thank you, Microsoft. Thank you for telling me what Synapse is and using it to draw a comparison between everything that we've been doing so far. So I don't know if they've done themselves any favors there, but it's obviously a little bit of scrutiny there that, is that really the case? Because I think if I was to be really cynical, I'd say that my view of Synapse so far, given that journey and that sort of release, is that my experience of Synapse is that it is very brittle. It might all be in one place, but still quite brittle because it's not ready. Anyway, that's going to hopefully be the end of my negativity. Yeah, we can be critical to some extent, but I want to kind of use that as drawing the line in the sand. So let's sort of move on and focus on some of the positives. So yes, I am grumpy, but I can be positive as well. So the thing I want to call out here in this narrative, and this is the thing that I absolutely do like and do want to get on board with, is that Microsoft tell us that Synapse brings together this data integration, this enterprise data warehousing and big data analytics in, as you'll see in the second lot of highlighting, this unified experience. Now that, I think, yes, that is what I want. That is certainly an attractive quality if we're talking about this suite of services. Because, as I've said, I'm old. I've been using SQL Server, the full stack of SQL Server from sort of 2000, 2005. So having all of those capabilities, all of those services within that single product suite, that unified experience, absolutely. Now that I like. So let's focus on that and let's think about that and let's use that going forward. So this is answering the question of what is Synapse according to Microsoft. Let me answer it another way for you now, because this is fairly complicated. We need to break this down. And I'm going to say, well, what is Synapse in terms of established services? And when I say established services, I mean things that we've already got available within Azure, things that we may or may not have already been using when we've been delivering our solutions. So for that, I'm going to call out these 6 and sort of reflecting back on that tweet I sent in November 2019, I'm also deliberately using the old icons here, the ones that aren't quite as blue and shiny as the new ones now. So of course we have Data Factory, we have the SQL Data Warehouse capability, a SQL database of sorts, a data lake, Power BI, and then basically some sort of Spark compute. Yeah, whether we think of that as HD Insight or Databricks, but of course both existing services that we had available in Azure. So to answer that question again, what is it in terms of these established services? I think, yeah, that's a good starting point. So we bring along Synapse, and of course for our SQLDW, there was this obvious rename, just rename and throw it in there. For our Data Factory, there's that sort of common code base, common user interface that we now see. For our data lake, we have this storage now sort of pre-integrated and almost pre-mounted and available for our compute. We have an abstraction almost over the Power BI workspace where we can still create reports and visuals and things, and we do that now within the Synapse environment, or we can do. We have some now Spark compute. It's not Databricks, it's not HD Insight, it's Microsoft's implementation over Apache Spark that they've made available as now a Spark compute offering within Synapse. And finally, of course, we have a SQL database of sorts, which we can go into more detail about. So all of those things come in, and then they come out the other side with their new blue shiny icons, if you like. And we have now these integration pipelines. We have our SQL pools, provisioned compute. We have what is called SQL on demand, this now serverless compute. We of course have our data lake storage. We have this abstraction over our Power BI workspace, and of course these Apache Spark compute pools. Now, this for me definitely kind of poses a problem, because my head only has so much space in it to remember things. And apparently children's birthdays and things like that, they're quite important things to remember. So, I have limited space left. And when it now comes to the breadth and the depth of knowledge that we have to have, and the tools that we have to wield on a daily basis for our customers to deliver these solutions, I'm sort of struggling, because if we take those services on the left, that breadth of knowledge, that's already pretty wide. That's a lot of stuff in there. But then if we have to go deep on those services as well and really understand what's in there, what we could say is, if anything, that we had that wide set of services to begin with, and now with Synapse, we've almost just doubled that. And yeah, all right, there's some existing knowledge we can call on, but we are sort of really pushing the envelope there of that breadth of things now, because Synapse has all of these included. But let's see how we go on. So very crudely, we can draw that line, if we like, or draw those lines between those established services and what's now available in Synapse. So now if somebody says to me, well, let's just use Synapse, which I think sort of the managers of the world who believe some of the marketing, they will tend to do that. Synapse is the new thing, let's use that. And I guess I really find myself reining them in a little bit with, okay, let's use Synapse, fine, but which part? Because it is this complete suite of services. And that's for me the main takeaway here. So that's what it was, and that's what these services are. But let's go deeper. Let's think about what we actually get, because it's one thing to understand what those services are or what those services were in terms of what we already had. But when we look inside the Synapse workspace, we obviously then get this new picture of things as well. And we have to then maybe undergo that sort of translation in our mind again of what these things are or were and how they actually fit now within this development environment. So as you'll see here on the slide, we've got what we see when we open that Synapse workspace. We have home, data, develop, integrate, monitor, and manage. So how does that translate to these services then? And where do we actually start to see the benefits of that integration and bringing those things together? Well, home, that's home. If we start with data, we can say, yes, fine. We can develop the data sets that go into our integration pipelines. Now, of course, straight away, you think, well, what's a data set? And of course, straight away, we have to now sort of prey on that existing knowledge and that assumption that within an integration pipeline, within a data factory pipeline, we have to assume that we understand what a data set is. Otherwise, that knowledge that you've got before, it's either there or it isn't, or you've got to go and relearn it. But I'm going to take the stance that we know what a data set is. We can, of course, develop data and tables and things when it comes to using our provision SQL pools, our SQL data warehouse tables, And again, there's a whole raft of assumption and knowledge that comes with that when we're developing in this environment. So it really challenges that depth straight away. Data, of course, could be the actual data itself available within our storage. And that data could also be a bunch of Hive metadata store tables that we've surfaced via our Apache Spark compute pools as well. So, straight away we're going down this path of that existing knowledge and these existing services and trying to translate that back to this development experience and these things, these components or whatever that we have to build within this Synapse environment to start using it. If we carry on and think about develop, which, a little obscure here, but we can develop Synapse data flows, this graphical interface that you'll see that's available within our pipelines. I think Catherine's got a talk on that later. We can develop the SQL scripts for our SQL compute and our on-demand pools, and we can develop Power BI reports and data sets. Integrate is a good one. Our integrate pipelines, our integration pipelines, that orchestration that I like to think of, that control flow capability, where it comes down to gluing all of these things together. All those scripts and notebooks or whatever that we've developed using that compute, we need this integrate, these pipelines to bring all of that stuff together. And we have to build those up using activities within those pipelines. Again, I'm preying on existing knowledge that hopefully we have when it comes to using Data Factory. Monitoring, of course, a little more intuitive. We can monitor everything about what we want to run within our Synapse environment, including the integration runtimes, which hopefully we know what they are. The integration runtimes, that is the compute used by our orchestration services. And lastly, in our manage, our toolbox, our spanner, we can, of course, manage all of the above, adjusting, adding more, changing security, etc., etc. And I guess that manage is really where, just to complete my picture, is where that workspace comes in. So it's that workspace that brings these things together in that sort of single pane of glass developer interface now, where we can interact with all of the above. It's also perhaps worth saying that it's that workspace where we can control our security roles and our identities and ultimately connect all of the above to our source control repository. So that's just another way to answer this question of what is Azure Synapse Analytics, this time by hopefully looking inside and doing some mapping between those services that we hopefully know and what we get available in the workspace. And just for a bit of fun, of course, let's put all the lines on at the same time, just so we're really confused about what goes where. Good stuff. So for me, in my agenda, I've really sort of spent a long time talking about what is Azure Synapse Analytics, and I've tried to answer it in a few different ways, hopefully to build up that picture of where it came from, what it is now, what we hopefully understand about it with those past services, and my sort of opinions and interpretations of it when it comes to that comparison of this suite of processing services. So let me now just kind of touch on everything else and hopefully setting up some of the agenda for the rest of your day. So when we talk about this Synapse suite of services, this is now the picture that I like to use. I've got those components in there that we hopefully understand, and I've added my data flows in here as well now, because I think that's a kind of an important one to call out as an individual thing. Although it's built into our pipelines, I think those data flows, that graphical interface that we get where we can build those transforms in a very nice and easy way, I think it's good to call that out. The other way to break down this picture, if we're definitely working in this cloud environment, is to understand where we decouple that compute from the storage. And we could do it like this. We could say that Over on the left, deliberately drawn here, we have all of those compute resources, and we can scale those out, we can scale them up. It very much depends on what we of course need to do, but we have that definite distinction between the compute available and that common sort of data lake storage that's there over on the right hand side. Now, just to go into that compute sort of a step further, the way Microsoft talk about that compute, which I think is important to understand, is serverless and dedicated. And what does this mean for us? Well, to draw some lines here between what we have available, I'm calling out the integrate pipelines and that SQL on demand as serverless compute. And as you'll see, the data flows, the SQL pools, the Apache Spark pools as being that dedicated compute. Now, I think ultimately this relates to our management of that compute, and I guess it ultimately relates to what we pay for as well. And perhaps the better way to think about it, if we do sort of a translation in that terminology, because we do love to change the way we refer to things, and the way I like to call it is serverless. It's not, there's no servers. Of course there's servers, but it's servers less. And what do we really mean by that when we actually think about that compute that we're using? Servers less. Well, for me, and you'll see this when we interact with it, it's no longer the fact that we have infrastructure taken care of for us and hardware and networking, all of that stuff. That's sort of way in the rear view mirror at this point. We have that platform as a service compute and offering, but now we're sort of going one step even further beyond that, and now we don't even need to worry about some of that provisioning of the clusters and the environments or the things that we need to turn on and off. When we think about serverless, for me, it's that this compute, it's just there when we need it. We don't need to worry about anything that goes into it. We just say, I need this compute for this pipeline, for this SQLDB, this on-demand environment, and it's just there. It's good to go. That's it. So it's, for me, servers less. It's that one step beyond perhaps what we had when it came to our platform as a service technologies and that cluster management. To flip things over and think about that dedicated compute, or what is of course really called provisioned compute, for me that makes a bit more sense. It's where we've actually said to Microsoft or to our Azure environment that we are going to do this thing. I want a cluster made available for me to do that. And this is absolutely true of our SQL pools, our Apache Spark compute, our data flows. We say, I'm going to do this thing, provision that compute, get it ready for me, I'm about to use it. And then there is ultimately some management that goes into that for us. So we have to do something when it comes to that provision compute. We might scale it out, we might scale it up. That's on us, and it's dedicated for us to do that. So moving on, let's now actually think about this suite of services, and let's think about now the advantages that this is going to give us. So I've said that I like this idea of bringing these things together. And if we actually now integrate these things into this single product, this single platform, if you like, this single suite of resources, how does that help us? What does it give us? Well, let's focus on our pipelines to begin with, our integration pipelines. We have our hosted integration runtimes, our Azure integration runtimes. Sadly, we don't have linked integration runtimes at the moment, and we also don't have SSIS integration runtimes. And perhaps just to be clear, there's no ability to run sys packages within our Synapse pipelines. That sort of feature parity between Data Factory and our Synapse pipelines is kind of one area where that isn't the case. But it's worth noting and worth being aware of that maybe that's something that's removed, those legacy sys packages, and perhaps rightly so. What else though? Well, when it comes to now having those data flows available and actually creating that data flow script, and what Microsoft have done to go from that user, that very friendly sort of graphical interface that you can build up those transforms with, because we're in this integrated environment now, we have that Spark compute provided, and they're available to actually run those data flow scripts. So within our Synapse environment, those data flow scripts will be compiled and run on the Apache Spark compute. Within our data factory, they run on Databricks compute, but ultimately the same thing underneath. So that's nice. We get that integration and we can use that compute to do that. With our SQL data warehouse, as I'm going to call it, we still get that same sort of scaled out architecture and compute underneath. We still got our 60 distributions of storage that sit there. But because we're now integrated, when it comes to, say, using Polybase to ingest our files from our storage, we don't have to now worry about things like the credentials and setting that up. We can just create those external tables. And because the storage is integrated with the SQL pool with this compute, we get that little bit of extra work done for us, which is nice. We have now streaming available. So you might have seen a demonstration of this at, I think, the last Ignite conference, where we can actually now stream data directly into the SQL pool tables. So, that's also nice. We have, and this is quite an important one, this common metadata store. So when we create a table via our Apache Spark compute pools, we say, I want this table, and that ultimately goes into our Hive metastore. That Hive metastore then gets shared, and it's also used when we have these external tables defined via our SQL on demand. What we also have is that, and you'll see this in your storage, there's a temp folder where that Hive metastore, that information actually gets persisted, to support what we actually want from our compute. And I guess what would also be nice to see over time is that if that common metastore then also got used in that SQL pool as well. So we have that common metadata view across everything. Maybe even go as far as to say, well, within our data flows, when we define a data set, it could use that same common metastore. But who knows? I'm speculating. What it does mean is, though, that with that common metastore, we can now create a pattern that we've not actually had available. And that is, if we want to read our Parquet files and we want to do something with them in Power BI, we can use that Spark compute. We can bring in that Parquet file. We can create it as a table. That table gets surfaced via that SQL on demand serverless compute. And then, within Power BI, we say just connect to this SQL instance using the same connectors that we would normally use, and we can then read that. So we get this serverless compute and this sort of T-SQL interaction over our data lake. So that's a really nice feature. And I say something that we've not had before. So that integration within this suite, that's definitely one advantage that we don't have in any other tool at the moment. We have, of course, Delta Lake available. So the Spark compute pools, they have these libraries pre-installed. So we have Delta Lake 0.6 at the moment. Our integration pipelines, we have this new activity purely for the purposes of executing these new notebooks. Notebooks within the development workspace of Synapse that now support not just Python, Scala, and Spark SQL, but also C# as well. So for me, as a C# T-SQL person of old, it's really nice that we've got this extra syntax support available, and definitely the markdown experience as well of adding narrative and things to your notebooks in here is definitely a new thing that's really nice. We have that Power BI workspace interaction that I've mentioned, where we point Synapse at our Power BI workspace. It makes it available in the Synapse workspace. Of course, you need to be in the same tenant and have the relevant permissions, but again, a nice sort of integration feature. We have this integrated storage explorer. And you think, well, okay, no big deal. We've had Storage Explorer available via the Azure portal for ages. We could always browse our storage via that method. But when I say integrated, what you'll see from the context menus, if you are exploring your storage and you look at those data sets, you can right click on those files and you can quickly create a notebook, quickly create a SQL script. Because we've got that context awareness of the compute available within this same suite of tools, we can quickly do those things. So we definitely have sort of rapid development, rapid previewing of those data sets available. So it's not just that Storage Explorer preview that we've had via the portal for ages, it's that integrated experience that really makes it a lot nicer when we're in this Synapse suite. We have some very granular security roles. So from that Azure management pane, where you go to the portal and you go to that management window and you assign an owner role, that's fine. But now actually within this workspace, we get a lot more granular security, a lot more control over what we allow a user to do. Do they access just the SQL pool compute? Do they administer just the Spark clusters? We get a much more comprehensive security model, which is great to see. And of course, we can do that because it's integrated, it's in this workspace. And of course, the source control that I've called out. We have those JSON files for all parts of and all these components persisted. We'll see subfolders within our source control, and we'll see those artifacts that go into them. So again, also a really nice feature. Last two, I promise. The samples gallery. This I was a little bit skeptical about, but actually I've used it a few times now when I've been demoing Synapse to my customers, and we can now via the workspace go to the sample area, and we've got all of these public data sets made available that we can quickly bring into our Synapse environment, quickly spin something up, and really sort of start playing around and flexing what this technology can do. So that samples gallery and having that integrated and quickly give me that, I want to play with it. It's really nice. And then my last feature, my last thing here that I want to call out is the .NET experience, the namespace, the SDK that Microsoft have made available. And it's not just, of course, the libraries that we get. It's for me that developer endpoint. So when you're in the portal, you see all of your URLs that you've got to talk to Synapse. You get this, I believe it's globally unique URL, this developer endpoint to interact with Synapse. And that then covers all of the resources that I then got in the bottom half of this slide. That single developer endpoint, you can then authenticate with those clients, give it your service principal details and token or whatever you're using. But that single developer endpoint then allows you to interact with all of this. So that's far nicer than I think than any of the other sort of Azure .NET clients and SDKs that we've had so far. So I really like that. That's really nice. And again, because it's integrated, we can hit that one point, we can get all of this stuff. So just to wrap up, I'm nearly out of time, and hopefully just to try and again set up the rest of the day for you. That's for me what we get out of the box within this Synapse suite. But then I just want to call out a couple of links that we get here as well. The first one being Cosmos, which I think actually is the next talk you're probably about to see as part of this conference. So we get that this HTAP type concept that I'm sure you'll hear about. So Synapse Link for Cosmos is definitely a nice feature. And then the other side is that you'll see we can now connect Synapse to PureView, our data catalog, as I'm going to call it. So we get that sort of governance, that classification, that management, and it connects and it integrates, and of course then queries and inspects all of this stuff that we've got in there as well. So lots of exciting stuff, bringing it together, integrating all of these things together within this Synapse suite is definitely a takeaway for me. So thank you everybody for listening. Here is my credentials, my contact details, so please reach out to me, let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your feedback. It's obviously very sort of sterile and isolated at the moment being here at home, so it'd be nice to have some interaction maybe by Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever, and thank you for listening.